Hey guys, what's happening? Today we're going to talk about apes. This is chapter 3. I guess I should put that on here. It's ecosystem ecology. Excuse me. Um, First of all, when we look at different ecosystems, many times you have several ecosystems that are sort of bouncing up or butting up against one another. Probably the easiest thing to think of here is like the entrance to the cave or a lake shore, something like that, something that has a very distinctive boundary. With most ecosystems, it's far more difficult to determine where one stops and another begins. And it's actually at these ecosystem boundaries that we have a vast increase in biodiversity because you've got things that live in both ecosystems. So, like if you think about caves, for example, at the cave entrance, you're going to have, well, things that live inside of the cave, but you're also going to have stuff that lives outside of the cave. Another ecosystem boundary that a lot of people don't think about is day and night. You'll have diurnal animals out during the day and nocturnal animals out at night. And at that, whoa, the heck is going on here? Don't. Hey, stop. Oh, I hit the icon that says camera. Anyway, okay. So at the boundary between the two, you'll actually have daytime animals and nighttime animals both intermingling with one another at dusk. And if any of you are hunters or fishermen or anything like that, or fisherwomen, I guess, sorry, um, then you know certainly the best time to go fishing is at dusk or at dawn, where you actually have both of those types of animals that are out. You've got just a greater diversity. So we see increased diversity at boundaries. Now, um, one of the things that probably the thing that determines diversity more than anything else is the amount of photosynthesis that takes place. This is also something that we call primary productivity. The pure amount of photosynthesis that's taking place. So the number of algae or plants that are in an ecosystem determines the number of animals that can be in that ecosystem. So let's just kind of go over this just real quick. Um, Photosynthesis, if we look at the equation of this, we have carbon dioxide plus water yields a sugar and a byproduct of oxygen. Now, in order to do this, we need some light energy to actually come into this. All right. Now, we're actually not balanced here, so let's balance this. That actually needs 6 O2s, 6 waters, and 6 CO2s. So what this means is that we're going to use the energy that's found in light, and that's going to break down the carbons and oxygens and hydrogens and build a sugar. Now, what's left over is some oxygen gas. That's photosynthesis. If we actually go in the opposite direction, that's actually respiration. So we have um, some sugar. In biology, I'm sure that we call this glucose, but it can actually be quite a few different things. All right, so we have some sugar and some oxygen, and we're going to break those apart. And when we break those apart, we get energy released in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And the byproducts here are water and carbon dioxide. let's look at this in a little bit different way. You know that carbon has 4 bonding points to it. And if there's 6 carbons here, so if we take one of those carbons off, we're actually going to need to attach something to that carbon that has a really strong affinity for electrons. And as it turns out, we can put an oxygen or an O2 and make CO2. So for each of these 6 carbons, we're going to need 6 oxygens. And that's going to produce 6 carbon dioxides. All right, great. What are we left over with? Well, we're left over with H12O6, which is really the same as 6 waters. That's why this works. Okay, so that's photosynthesis and respiration. Now, food chains are basically a measurement or an observation of the direction that energy flows. So you have things that are like using green to underline grass is probably not the best thing. That's a little better. Okay, so we've got something like a primary producer, a photosynthesizer like grass, and the zebra eats the grass and the lion eats the zebra. Now there's something I want to point out here, and that's the direction that these arrows are pointing. Arrows point in the direction of energy flow. So the arrows always show where the energy is going. All right, that's going to be important when we talk about food webs in a minute. So the energy goes from the grass to the zebra, and from the zebra to the lion. Now, a couple of different terms that we see up here are things like consumers, or predator, or autotroph. Now, it's important to realize that we know that a lion is a predator, but a zebra is also a predator. I know we don't necessarily think about that, but it's using predation on the grasses. And it doesn't really have to chase down grasses. That'd be a really weird thing. Anyway, so consumers or predators are heterotrophs. They eat other stuff. Now, that zebra is an herbivore. Basically, it eats producers. The lion is a carnivore. It eats other consumers. And then we also have, when we talk about like a trophic pyramid, we have primary, we have secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and so on and so forth all the way up. And each of these different levels here is called a trophic level. So a food chain just shows energy in one direction in a very small part of that. A food web is really probably a better description of what's going on, because it's not really things going in one direction. It's far more complicated than just a food chain. And just like before, you see that we have these arrows that zoom in. We have these arrows that are showing the direction of energy flow. So we have grasses, rabbits eat the grasses. Okay, fox eat the rabbits. Right? Grasses are eaten by deer. Chipmunks eat nuts from trees and stuff, but foxes eat chipmunks. Hawks eat chipmunks. Owls eat chipmunks, so on and so forth. So the important thing to note here is that the arrow points in the direction of energy flow. Now, food webs are far more complex, and sometimes it's really difficult for us to actually predict something like a food web. Couple other terms that are here: scavengers, organisms that consume dead animals. I don't like just simply saying that an animal is a scavenger or a predator, because we tend to think it narrows us down too much. For example, this fox that's over here is certainly a predator. It's going to hunt down chipmunks and rabbits. But if it comes across one that's died for any other reason, it's going to scavenge that. So all predators essentially are scavengers too. Um, so I would avoid using that term. The book brings it up, and you probably see that in other areas, but just be aware of that. All right, a detritivore is something that's really good at breaking down dead tissue. So something that's eating stuff that's already dead. And then a decomposer is an organism that takes that organic waste and breaks that back into molecules that'll be recycled. So things like a detritivore would be something like a worm or insects that eat dead things. And then decomposers take the waste products, all of the poop, and turn that back into nitrites, and phosphates, and stuff like that that goes into the soil and then is picked up by other things. All right, so when we look at, okay, trophic levels, I'm kind of draw this one out here. You probably remember a trophic pyramid where the producers are the things that are at the very base of that trophic pyramid, the grasses, the photosynthesizers. And then you have primary consumers that eat some of those things like rabbits or hares, um, or zebras, or I guess wildebeests. Okay, great. And then you have secondary consumers. Um, and these are typically higher predators, like cheetahs, and like lions, and hyenas, certainly. They, in this graphic, are sort of separating scavengers. You can see how, like, the hyena here is both a primary consumer, meaning it does eat some grasses and roots. Hyenas are kind of weird. It's certainly a secondary consumer. It's a predator, and it's also a scavenger. Yeah, well, the lion is also a scavenger. Um, Cheetahs will also be a scavenger. Even they don't like to eat a lot of things that are already dead, but they'll certainly do it. So don't get caught up too much in that kind of an idea. Um, and then sometimes we'll have, let me put this one right up here, a top predator that's actually hunting all of those. Now, we know that energy movement is important here, and you probably, yeah, okay, we'll talk about that in a second. You probably remember that going from one level to a next, some energy decreases. And that's what really keeps the populations in check. So it's not just that you have this pyramid that's based on numbers of animals, it's also based on the amount of available energy. We'll get to that in a second. All right, so a couple just basic definitions here. Oops, I want that. Gross primary productivity is how much total photosynthesis is taking place. Net primary productivity is how much energy is being stored from photosynthesis. So the plants, plants aren't going through photosynthesis just so that they can create calories for other things. They're doing it for themselves, and they're running off of some of that. But they do store a lot of that in the form of glucose, and that's where herbivores and stuff come in. So net primary productivity is the one that we're typically really concerned with, is how much available energy is there for everything else. And something I was just talking about a little bit ago is the amount of energy that's actually available to move from one level to the next. Typically about 90% is either used by the organisms, like the producers, or lost in the conversion as heat. So only about 10% moves from one level to the next and one level to the next. Okay. You should be skeptical of those nice round numbers, But for our purposes and what they'll accept on the exam, those numbers work. So if you have 10,000 joules of available energy in producers, the zebras are only going to be able to really use about 1,000 of those. The lions are only going to be able to use about 100 of those. So what that means is to get the same amount of calories that the zebra is getting, the lion is going to have to eat 10 zebras. That's an important idea here. That also explains a few extra things. It explains why there's not that many top predators. It also explains why most predators are actually pretty small. I mean, think about it. With a couple of exceptions like orcas and some of the very large sharks, most predators are less than 500 pounds. A lot of herbivores are far greater than that. I mean, if you think of the biggest animals on the planet, they're all herbivores, or at least the biggest terrestrial ones. Whales are consumers, but there's a reason for that. Um, so, elephants, hippos, giraffes, zebras, cows, all that, they're all herbivores. And the reason is that they get more energy from being lower on the food chain than predators do. All right. That's it for right now. We've